My name is Toni Hardin, Kentucky School for the Blind Outreach Consultant serving KVEC. Today we will talk about the process and considerations when determining whether a student will not receive Braille instruction. All examples in all parts of these videos are examples provided for fictional scenarios to assist in the decision-making process. Each student is unique, and instruction should be tailored to meet the needs of each of those individual students. Not all possible examples have been provided. When discussing literacy rights and the Education Acts for the visually impaired, Public Law 105-17 strengthened IDEA, affirming that children with visual impairments would receive instruction in Braille unless the IEP team decides otherwise. It also added orientation and mobility instruction as a related service under the Act. It established high expectations for students with disabilities to achieve real educational results. This is a specific provision in the law about Braille instruction for the visually impaired students. The Braille provision, as it is sometimes called, was added when the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA, was reauthorized in 1997 and was continued in the 2004 reauthorization. Braille use and instruction for all students identified as having a visual impairment, including blindness, until the IEP team determines that Braille is not appropriate for the child. This is done based upon the evaluation of the child's current and future reading and writing needs. Should be given the instruction of Braille until determined otherwise. It means that the IEP team is obligated to assume, even before an evaluation is conducted, that Braille instruction will be a necessary service for the blind or visually impaired child. This is an important shift from past educational practices, when it was routinely assumed that children with some usable vision would read print and only be provided with Braille instruction as the last resort. Does this mean that a child with a visual impairment who has sufficient vision to read enlarged print or regular print with magnification shall also be provided with Braille instruction and the opportunity to use Braille? Absolutely, unless, of course, as the provision states, an evaluation that takes into consideration the child's future need for Braille literacy demonstrates that Braille is not appropriate. How do we determine that Braille is not needed? Through the LMA, or the Learning Media Assessment. There are many elements to be considered in a learning media assessment. The Braille provision specifically requires that the following be addressed: skills in reading and writing needs, and future need for Braille or Braille instruction. The assessment of future needs is important because a number of congenital eye diseases or disorders are degenerative. As we know, the educational system is charged with the responsibility of preparing students for a lifetime of literacy. This provision protects the right of children with visual impairments to be provided with skills in a literacy mode that will also last a lifetime, whatever the prognosis might be for their vision. When reviewing the eye report by a licensed physician, does the diagnosis indicate a progressive loss of vision with a degenerative eye disease? Does it indicate a congenital eye disease? These are factors indicative of Braille instruction immediately. Is there measured acuity with corrections worse than 2200? Are there fields compromised with a field loss of 20 degrees or worse? Are there lighting requirements or any further examinations advised? As part of a learning media assessment, the teacher of visually impaired will determine what sensory channels the student is using. This is done through sensory observations that should be detailed and unbiased. It will determine the primary and secondary sensory channels for learning, which could include visual, auditory, tactile, or dual. They will determine how the student accesses the classroom materials. This includes maps, diagrams, and differing coloring backgrounds. They will also look at how the student is writing, what utensils are used, what they read back, and what they write. Do they stay on the line or write over previously written material? They will also talk about their reading medium and their reading inventory. The most commonly used reading inventory in Kentucky is the Jerry Johns and Burns and Rowe. There are many offered for free online, such as the Jennings version, and most often are included in the student's reading series within their home school, just as Pearson is. The most commonly used resource when completing a learning media assessment is the LMA book by Koenig and Holbrook. It includes pre-made forms for the use of sensory channels, general learning media, literacy readiness, and more. It is offered as a free download with the link provided. Possibly one of the most valuable resources within the pre-mentioned book is on page 43, where they break down the common characteristics of a student who requires a print reading program versus a Braille reading program. Establishing the types of general learning media the student uses will facilitate the later process of selecting the specific literacy medium or media. For example, if the student primarily uses visual media for general learning, initial evidence exists to support, although it does not confirm, that the student will read in a visual medium, which is print. On the other hand, if the student primarily uses tactual or auditory information for learning, then you can expect that the student will read in a tactual medium, which is Braille. As you can see from the examples, bigger is not always better. At the 20x zoom, the student is able to zoom in on the text and still read efficiently. If you look at the 50x zoom, the student will not be able to read efficiently or effectively in any environment. In this example, you can see that the student is able to read the large print text at approximately 18-point font and still enables them to see the entire page of print. All that is needed to magnify at 18x zoom is the graph that is shown in smaller print. Here are a few examples that you might see when determining a reading medium. If the student is able to read regular print at a typical distance, then most likely Braille will not be needed. If they are able to read regular print with magnification, we have to think about how much and at what distance. Just as the previous example, magnification is not always the best answer. A student who reads at 12-point font with a 4x handheld magnifier, Braille would not be needed. If the student reads at 18-point, which is considered large print, zoomed on a video magnifier to 20x, you should consider Braille for efficiency and effectiveness. If a student reads large print, you need to think about what font and at what distance. If the student is reading 16-point at typical distance, then Braille would not be needed, only large print. If the student is reading 24-point font with a slant board and read at 4 inches, you should consider Braille as an instruction. A few characteristics that you might see of a student who requires possible Braille instruction is high visual fatigue and anxiety when presented Braille materials. They may also show a desire to explore the environment tactually. They may also be curious when presented tactile materials, and they may touch and then look for the details or colors. Additional resources that are available are the National Reading Media Assessment, and it has been designed for use both with students who are not yet reading, pre-readers, and with youth in kindergarten through high school. Both the pre-reader assessment and the K-12 assessment include observation and interview forms, an assessment conducted by the TVI, an assessment of future need, and a results and recommendation page. The Braille Readiness Grid for preschoolers is a literacy readiness grid that enables parents and teachers to identify accomplished skills and target other skills for educational programming. Using observation and informal assessment, identify which skills in each area a child has accomplished. You highlight the accomplished skill box entirely, and the emerging skills are partially filled in with a highlighter. Non-highlighted skill boxes are skills targeted for the child's educational program. This is a fictional example of a low-vision student that does not need Braille. Anne has albinism with a visual acuity of 20/80 in the better eye. Her eye condition is stable with near acuity of 20/60 and her distance is the same. She is able to read regular print, which is 12-point font with magnification, and 16-point font at 16 inches. She accesses her classroom curriculum using print with multiple magnification devices. Her learning medium is primarily vision and secondary is auditory. This is a fictional example of a visually impaired student that does need Braille. Joe has optic nerve hypoplasia with a visual acuity of object perception. His condition is stable. He is unable to read the eye chart at a distance. For near acuity, he can read letters or see pictures that are 3 inches tall at 3 inches. This is approximately 250 font. Magnification is not an efficient means to access his curriculum. His learning media is primarily tactile and secondary auditory. Joe likes to look at items for some activities to help him understand things better. This is a fictional example of a low-vision student that has a progressive condition and does need Braille. Carrie has retinal dystrophy with an acuity of 2100 and her condition is uncertain. Functional distance and near acuity is 2150. She is able to read regular print at 3 inches, but fatigues within 10 minutes of reading. Carrie uses magnification for all reading items and 18-point font at 16 inches for anything not magnified. Initial eye report measured 20/60. Her learning media is primarily vision and secondary auditory. You may be presented with a low-vision student that has a potentially progressive condition and may need Braille at some point in the future. This should be determined on a case-by-case basis. The TVI should also follow their acuity year to year closely. Poor visual efficiency even after instruction and severe or frequent visual fatigue are often characteristics that you will see when Braille instruction is needed. You should teach Braille as a secondary medium which may or may not be used in the classroom setting, but only in direct service. As a general expectation, the whole code should be taught before removing Braille instruction. Additionally, the need for Braille in the curriculum should be discussed annually at the very least.